Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Hello to everyone. I'm from the Netherlands, so my German is not the best, but so I will be talking in English today.
Afternoon, and thanks for having me. Thanks for the Austrian Central Bank. Thanks for the other organizers to organize such an important event at such an important point in time, I would say. It's not easy to speak after such a great speaker as the professor before me, but I'm going to try to give you a little bit more of the perspective that we people from the finance ecosystem, and particularly the ones in central banking and supervision, have on this topic. And I do that obviously in a time when the topic of environmental risks, climate risks, but definitely also broader nature-related risks and biodiversity risks get a little bit less attention, in all honesty. The talk of the town at central banks and supervisors is about geopolitical fragmentation. If it's not about that, it's about AI or cyber threats or other technological developments driving us. And I think it is my task, it is the task of the community of central bankers and supervisors to also very much keep an eye out for the more long-term risks, but the risks that might actually be much more impactful if we think about it. So I want to start off with that. While you are reading the quote of my boss, the central bank of the president of the Central Bank of the Netherlands, and also the chair of the Financial Stability Board, let me say that we central banks, as I say, we are there to also really very much focus on long-term risks. We are also apolitical, I find very important to stress. We focus on the impact that the outside world has on our financial system, on our economies, and on our individual financial institutions. We're not there to openly or secretively try to change the world to make it a better place. I think it's all our intent, but it's not our primary goal. Nor are we there to pursue or support a political agenda. We are very much independent, and we try to safeguard that as much as possible. So I must also say that if something to us, something that's happening in the outside world that we all deem very important, but is not material to the financial sector or to a financial institution or to the economy for that matter, we won't be analyzing this. But the reverse also holds, that if something is material to those factors, but it is not deemed to be of interest at that moment to the elected politicians, then we will analyze it. So we are apolitical. We do what we need to do. We look at the risks that are facing us, and we analyze them, whether our politicians like it or not. So today I want to build my story on 4 messages that you can see on the screen here. I think it's fair to say that even for those who are in my line of work, who consider climate a very much established topic yet, nature is quite often, nature and biodiversity, I'm going to use the terms interdependently, but it's quite often still a bridge too far. It is quite often that I get asked the question, can we focus on climate and solve that for now, and then we'll turn to nature afterwards? My answer would be, I wish we could. Unfortunately, I don't think that reality will allow us to. I think for one, we might find out that if we would be able to solve climate first and then turn to nature, that nature has then so far deteriorated that we're too late. The professor, I think, made it very clear to us in his previous speech. But secondly, I think, as I'll also talk a little bit more about, climate and nature are very much interlinked topics. They relate very much to each other. I would even argue that climate is part of nature. Which turns me to how we at the Network for Greening the Financial System think about this. And I'm going to keep this rather short because there have been very knowledgeable people before me who are much better in explaining what nature actually is, what it consists of, and how we should think about it. But let me just do it for the purpose of how we think it's important to analyze it within a context of the financial ecosystem. So this is how we defined it. But I think the most important that I want to note is that in front of you is not a climate scientist nor a nature scientist. So I'm not trying to convince you of anything that's happening in nature, because I take those things as an input as well. I listen to people like the professor before me and read what is to be read about this, and I take it for granted. But it's important, I think, to note that we think on things like nature in terms of ecosystems, ecosystem services, biodiversity as being part of that. Now, I think I'm the third person today who shows this picture. So I think by now you should believe that we have crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. If you don't, then, well, maybe the next speaker will show this picture as well and try to convince you of it. But we also take it as an input. We see this happening. And this also tees up a little bit what I'm going to say next, which is that we consider climate and nature as part of the same system, part of something that is very interlinked with each other. And I think that, at least speaking for myself, I quite often don't fully grasp that yet, how they are interlinked, how they play into one another. There are things like tipping points that we also have heard earlier about today that are very important. But the most important thing that I note from here, why I decide or why I plea for the analysis of nature, of climate as part of nature, is that they play into one another, and that the solutions to one may harm or may benefit the other as well. So solutions to climate change could be harmful to nature. Think about extensive mining of natural materials to drive electrification. But also the reverse can hold. Nature can also decrease climate risks. We've heard a couple of examples, but I mean tree planting as an obvious example to absorb CO2, green roofs in urban areas to improve insulation. Or another one that I like most, like a lot, is increasing whale population, because they, and I hope the professor agrees with me, but as I've read, the whales actually absorb a lot of CO2, and increasing their population might help us to sequester carbon. So over to the financial sector and what we've been doing. I think we have seen, and research that has been performed in my column has shown that the financial sector is exposed to nature, and the dependency on ecosystem services is significant. And just a couple of pieces. There's much more out there, but I also wanted to at least say a couple of words about my own organization, the Dutch Central Bank. That was one of the first to start driving this topic, at least among central bankers and supervisors. And back in 2020, published a report called Indebted to Nature. And in that report, we recognize quite a couple of things, but we, for instance, talk about the concept of double materiality here in the sector. So nature loss affecting financial institutions, but also financial institutions affecting nature by the way that they finance things or the choices that they make in financing. And thereby also really pointing to the concept of reputational risks, potential transition risks. I think what is important here, what we try to do, is to make clear that we central bankers consider nature loss as a potential driver of what we call the traditional risk categories for financial institutions. Things like credit risks or liquidity risks, strategic risks, operational risks. And that is also the way that we try to analyze this. Once we're able to illustrate that there's materiality there, then there is a reason for us to be concerned. There is a reason for us to start acting. This particular study, which is, as I said, was one of the first exploratory studies, finds that 36% of the portfolio that was analyzed is highly dependent or very highly dependent on the provision of ecosystem services. Or if one of the ecosystem services that they are dependent on fails or starts to fail, the financial institution is in trouble, in short. As I said, it's a sort of an absolute minimum number. It doesn't analyze second-order effects. It doesn't look at more interdependencies, but it sort of sets the tone. Now, in the years that follow, many more studies have followed, that have analyzed this theme and the influence on the financial sector. One that I wanted to highlight is some work of the colleagues done at the European Central Bank. And as you see, that number has doubled in the 3 years. And it finds that 72% of euro area non-financial corporations are critically dependent on at least one ecosystem service. So it is just to show that from a finance ecosystem perspective, this is something we should be concerned about. And that's also the reason, in the end, that we act. That is the reason that we spend capacity on analyzing this and trying to come up with ways to mitigate those risks as much as possible. So that was a long introduction of introducing myself here as a member of the NGFS, of which I will say a couple of words about. The Network for Greening the Financial System is a network of central banks and supervisors that was established in 2017 by 7 countries, among which the Dutch Central Bank. And it's now a network of 140 plus members and observers, of which the Austrian Central Bank and the Austrian Financial Markets Authority. So the growth shows at least that the understanding of this being a potential risk to the economy is increasing. I won't go into depth about everything we do, but maybe good to know is that the work is organized around traditional work streams that central banks are keeping themselves occupied with. So think about monetary policies, supervision, scenarios, own organizations, etc. And I co-chair a so-called task force that focuses on mainstreaming around nature-related risks. And what the task force aims to do is actually tries to get the understanding of nature-related risks to the same level as we already have around climate, and to mainstream it so that at one day we can say, okay, we are now able to analyze those two concepts together, and then the task force can dissolve. We're not there yet, but we're taking the steps. Maybe a couple of words on what we then have done in the years since 2022 when the task force was established. I think one of the key publications that we did is the so-called conceptual framework that I'll immediately jump towards, which is basically a very simple way of trying to understand the transmission of nature-related events into those traditional risk categories for financial institutions. So I don't claim by any means that this is rocket science ahead of you. I think it's rather intuitive, but that's, I think, also the power of the framework. And it actually shows that if you take nature events as an input and you work them through in a relatively simple 3-step approach, you can arrive at least at an intuitive, conceptual, qualitative understanding of why a nature event could lead to a traditional risk for a financial institution. And this has proven to be very good language for us to send into the world, so to say, because the question of how do we supervisors need to deal with nature has long been a difficult one that we've not been able to easily explain, and I think this is at least a way that we're moving towards it. We're building a compendium also of so-called case studies in which we show how this framework can be used in practice and to what sort of more tangible results it can lead. So if you would read it, this is available obviously publicly online. You will find also, for instance, a case study about the Amazon and a loss of Amazon rainforest and how that might actually translate into concrete financial risks for the sector. We're not there yet, far from it, I would say, because one of the larger problems or one of the larger issues that we still need to solve for is how do we now actually move from exposure, which is actually what I've been talking to you about so far, to actual risk. And on the right-hand side of this page, you see what we consider the 3 ingredients for establishing a risk, of which we actually only have a really good idea about number 2 yet. So this is work in progress. I cannot tell you that we're there and that we're solving the puzzle. We're really trying to. We're building on the knowledge that we have on climate scenarios and trying to come here to insights. And that's also one of the objectives of the task force at the NGFS. We worked on a big technical document that you can see here on the right-hand side, which actually does recommendations of how to move from where we are now towards, at someday, the full establishment of climate-nature interlinked scenarios. And I think that the important message that comes across is, one, we need to do a lot of work. 1B, as we know where to move towards. That doesn't mean that it's easy or that it'll be quick, but we do have an idea of the path that we need to move on to get there. And in the meantime, there are a lot of tools available that we can start using to at least give us a bit more insight than we have currently. And a bit of scenario-related work on the financial sector, on nature events for the financial sector is coming out. My central bank has published something in 2023, which is more of a methodological exercise than it is really a policy-ready document, but the steps are being taken. I'm going to round up, but I didn't want to do so just before also mentioning that at my own central bank in the Netherlands, we're also very much working on this topic and really trying to also integrate that concept of nature-related risks into our core functions. A couple of examples on the slide. I won't elaborate on them now. I could in the panel if of interest, but we really see that over the breadth of our organizations at central banks, nature is to be considered in our economic advice, in our supervision, in the way that we treat our own investments and reserve management, and so on and so forth. That brings me towards the end. My final message about what we still aim to do. I keep it short. This is for the next steps for the network, for the task force. We will continue on that nature scenario work, really driving towards those integrated nature climate scenarios. We will keep on building portfolio of case examples on the framework, and very much so trying to really mainstream the consideration of nature into the work that we central bankers do. I was talking over lunch with someone. I said, success for me would be if I'm out of a job in a couple of years, because that means that it has come into the DNA of our organizations. And it's actually the monetary policy maker that considers nature and not the sustainability officer that does. Until then, I'll be happy to keep on talking about it. I thank you very much.